So, there's a small indie Japanese animation company you may have heard of called Studio Ghibli. That's kind of a joke, but I've talked to multiple anime-loving friends who ask what my favorite anime is, and they are utterly confused when I say Porco Rosso. I mean, it's my favorite, that doesn't mean it's the best. But that makes me wonder if this studio needs an introduction. It's not like they make a movie every year like Disney or DreamWorks. Downright legendary anime studio, made Spirited Away and Totoro, made very few terrible movies. Hayao Miyazaki is a genius. I love this studio, even if I haven't seen all their works. I'm sorry, I'm waiting for the opportune moment to watch Grave of the Fireflies. But this video isn't about Studio Ghibli, which will blow your mind if you didn't read the title. In 2014, a film producer from Ghibli named Yoshiaki Nishimura, which means basically nothing when it comes to the actual products, founded Studio Ponoc. This was a brand new studio composed of many bigwigs from Ghibli. It's worth noting that this was founded only a year after The Wind Rises release, which was meant to be Miyazaki's final film before he came out of retirement. Twice. It's very possible that that was a contributing factor to it, but I don't know, the Wikipedia page for the studio is pitifully small. But this essentially is the Don Bluth to Disney's Ghibli, though probably with a lot less malice than those two dividers did, and clearly not as much notoriety. Studio Ponoc movies can certainly be confused with Ghibli movies. With many former Ghibli employees, the animation, art style, and overall tone of their three movies can feel a bit derivative. That's not necessarily a bad thing though, it's just like how an American Tail and The Great Mouse Detective can feel similar. But being so new and smaller than Ghibli, they have a very small filmography. Several commercials, a short film for the 2020 Olympics, an anthology film, and 2 feature films. Today we'll be discussing their 3 feature films. No, not feature films, but their featured films. One of them is not feature length. Now, I've only seen one of these when I was younger, and I'll be honest, I wasn't impressed. But that was years ago. I want to jump back into the small studio's works and see what kind of merits it has, if it's at all comparable to Ghibli, or if this is a split off for the worst. This is Studio Ponoc, the Don Bluth of Ghibli. So, here's a little inside fact about me. Every once in a while, I look up ZJ Plays Is Wrong on YouTube to both get outside my echo chamber and boost my own ego. Mary and the Witch's Flower is a movie that I can't quite get a general consensus on, and I get the feeling that the majority of people who have seen it are going to think I'm wrong. Oh well, make that video and I'll watch it. This was the movie I said I watched before, on a plane nonetheless, but that was years ago, and up until now, it had the proud title of being the best movie that I absolutely hated. I mean, I despised it. Yet, I refused to call it a bad movie. It was actually very well made. The animation was pretty dang stunning, but I just felt cheated out of it. Watching it now, do I still hate it? Yeah. But do I think it's a well-made movie? No. No, this movie gets so much worse on rewatch. So let's address the bird in the fishnet. It's hard not to compare this to other Ghibli movies, particularly Kiki's Delivery Service, though the two productions seemingly had little in common. The director, Hiromasa Yonebayashi, had only directed 2 Ghibli films, being The Secret World of Arrietty and When Marnie Was There. And let me tell you, the first act of this movie really shows it. You know, child living with adults in the countryside with things going wrong for them. I assume that's how Marnie goes, I haven't seen it. But as far as I can tell, this has little to do with Kiki, as it was based on a pre-existing book, The Little Broomstick. Fun fact, Disney attempted to adapt this book back in the Bronze Era, but never took off the ground. But Ghibli movies that are based on books don't necessarily have the cleanest record when it comes to sticking to the source material. And honestly, they don't really pass as adaptations as well as they just do as original movies. So I'm not going to judge it on that end. So why did I hate this movie before? Honestly, the same reasons I hate it now. It's a horribly paced movie with a bunch of ideas that would make for better stories. What do I mean? Let me set the stage. The movie opens up with a witch escaping a fiery ruin and dropping flower seeds into a forest. Later in the film, we learn exactly what this was, and let me tell you, it would have made for a far better movie. And the movie kind of shoots itself in the foot by putting this in front of 20 minutes of non-magic exposition. I just wanted to see magic again. That looks so interesting. That being said, the first 20 minutes are fine. It just shows Mary Smith living with her great aunt in the country, trying to help but being accident prone and shamed by adults, and man, that struck a nerve with me. It also doesn't help that Mary's voice is not great in the English dub. She finds a special flower and some cats and meets Peter, and the two are kind of donks to each other. While looking for one of the cats, she finds a broom in the woods, breaks one of the flowers, gains magic powers, and flies into the sky. It's not terrible exposition. I can actually name a couple Ghibli movies with worse first acts, but it's a far cry from Spirited Away or Princess Mononoke's opening scenes, which are borderline perfect. After flying to a castle in the sky called Endor College, I wish I was making that up, the next 30 minutes are dedicated to showing off magic of this world, and admittedly, it is great. It's a world that mixes magic and science together, as what is science if not magic by another name? Chemistry is basically bonus in making when you think about it. That being said, This was when the pacing gets a little worse than before. Not in the plot, but rather in the animation. Scenes just last 10 seconds too long. The animation feels slow and dwells on the least interesting parts of the movie. I get that animation is expensive and this probably was meant to get as much bang for the studio's buck, but this feels less like getting most out of each cell and more like padding out the runtime. This movie is almost 2 hours, by the way. But when the animation is good, it's great. And with many of the magical scenes in this act, it fills your head with what's to come. Mary might have to learn how to use these new powers of hers whilst keeping the fact that she's not a real witch a secret. Except, no. Mary just has an amazing talent for what would take other witches and warlocks years to master. And get this, after this scene that shows us how this whole magical world works, the climax starts. We're barely halfway through the movie, and the climax is happening. Well, I guess there are two climaxes with a decently fun lore dump in the middle, but really, the third act is when the movie just nosedives in quality. It had such a good idea for a movie that didn't necessarily need a plot and could have survived with just a wacky premise of Mary attending the school, but no. Mary is a Mary Sue, suits up for the climax and goes to rescue Peter, who's been kidnapped. That may sound bad, but it was actually her that got her kidnapped, so at least she's willing to make up for her mistakes. But my goodness, this act is way too long. This would be like if they got to Lapida or the final battle happened halfway through the movie rather than at the tail end. Maybe it could have worked if it were shorter. It would have at least have been better, but maybe dedicate more budget to the cooler magic scenes rather than the okay ones in the climax. Also, the BBEG is just the Nightwalker / No Face. It's not that cool. And when the movie ends, I'm in relief. This movie is so long, yet dedicated all of its runtime to stuff that just feels so boring. Trust me, before this draft I had a much more detailed version of this section of the video, but after doing the other two and realizing how long it was in comparison to those two, I just had to come back and literally cut its word count in half. Maybe I'll put my full analysis of this movie in like a podcast or something. Or how about a live stream? Sound off in the comments who would watch me watch Mary and the Witch's Flower, pausing every 10 seconds to say what I don't like. Probably not you. This used to be the best movie that I hated, but now, it's just not a good movie. If you like it, that's good. More power to you. I look forward to your rebuttal, and I can see why. There's a lot to like about it. It has an incredibly unique approach to magic, and even the score by Takegatsu Miramatsu is a banger. But everything in this movie that actually brings me joy goes absolutely nowhere by the end and makes me feel cheated out by a better movie. This is a C- leaning on a D+ for me. That being said, do watch it, don't just take my word for it.
If you don't mind, might I ask what's brought you here?
So, let's change gears here. Modest Heroes, Ponoc's second work, is actually an anthology film consisting of 3 short films, each with a different director. Yonebayashi returns to direct the first, the second by Yoshiyuki Momose, who would go on to direct that horrible Ni no Kuni movie and The Imaginary, and the third by Akihiko Yamashita, his first and currently only directorial outing. That's not to say that these two new directors didn't have any experience. Momose was an animator on several Ghibli films, including my favorite Porco Rosso, and Yamashita was a character designer on Howl's Moving Castle. Going in, I actually had high hopes though. With Mary's clear problems being its pacing and structure, I was excited to see if 3 shorter films would provide levity to that and just let the ideas be ideas, similar to Pixar shorts. Somebody should rank all those sometime. So, what did I think? Well, the film opens on a small intro that looks very nice, but makes me wonder how big Ponoc's scope is. Like, guys, you made one film. This is something Disney would put in front of their home videos. That being said, it is very cute and a nice segue between the shorts, and it is clear that Ponoc has, or at least had plans to make this the norm. I can relate. But beyond that, holy crap guys, these shorts are actually on par with the Ghibli greats. Go watch them, right now. The whole movie isn't even an hour. You have nothing to lose. For starters, Kanini and Kanino. So, there are these little people who look strangely like crabs living in the water. Whether or not they are crabs is up in the air because they don't look like the other crabs in the river, yet they have the biology of crabs, but that's not important. These are 2 kids called Kanini and Kanino. Don't worry if you get them confused, this short is practically dialogueless, and if you're one of those weirdos that really likes the red turtle, you are gonna love this one. During a rather strong current, their father is pushed away, and they need to navigate the river to find him. It's a simple plot in a complex world. You know, like in Arrietty. And animation-wise, let me tell you, this is the best blend of traditional animation and CGI I've seen since Treasure Planet. The water, as well as some of the creatures, are done in CG, and amazingly don't look out of place. To some, it may look a little lazy, but to me, I haven't really seen water look like this since Pikmin 3. The detail and animation on this fish to make it look like a total predator work, even if it would have been more work just to draw it. It absolutely wowed me, but I was even more wowed at the second short, Life Ain't Gonna Lose. It's a simple slice of life short about a boy who has a lethal allergy to eggs, all drawn in a style of a Takahata film. It's such a dumb little premise that sounds like it should be an elementary school infotainment short, but no, I got teary-eyed at this. This is probably the best short out of the three. It perfectly demonstrates the trauma of both a child who has to go through near-death experiences and get special treatment from such, and the struggles of a parent who has to help him. His mother is just as much of a main character as he is, and the animation just works to show this abnormally stressful lifestyle. The way the outlines of the characters become all frizzy in the times of crisis, including the final scene, which might be one of the best animated scenes I've ever seen. That was a lot of scene. The movement of these characters every time there's something this boy is about to eat, and the suspense that comes with not knowing if it's going to turn for the worst. I can't believe this director went on to make the Ni no Kuni movie, and it kind of just left me slightly disappointed watching Invisible. Not that it's bad, but the high that Lund left me on was hard to come down from. Invisible is about a man who's weightless and invisible, who just seems to be forgotten by the world, and his struggle to find meaning. And man, I relate to that so much. It's depressing, no way around it, and the animation solidifies that. Drawing a nice even ground between the Miyazaki and Takahata art style, you feel just how down on his luck this man is, being so insignificant to the world, and the animation in and around him is just beautiful. Seeing water drops on his face, blood from his cuts, or just seeing through his own glasses. And you know you're doing something right if you can make a gas station Danish look absolutely delectable. It's alright. You'd never really think you'd appreciate that kind of art until you see it. It's almost as if they animated him normally and then just took out all the cells with his body in them afterwards. As a whole movie, these three near perfect shorts with these fun little transitions make up an S tier movie, and I mean that. Granted, I gave an S tier to Leo, so maybe it doesn't mean that much, but seriously, this is one of the greatest animated movies I've ever seen. I cannot recommend it enough. Make more like this, Ponoc. I love it.
Are you someone's friend too? A made-up friend?
Until recently, yes.
Now, before I discuss the studio's current latest film, I want to discuss the very large gap between the studio's work. I'm getting most of my information from Wikipedia, and am probably wrong about a bit of it, so if you know any information about any of this, let me know in the comments. But Mary came out in 2017, about 3 years after the studio was founded. Modest Heroes came out in 2018, which is incredibly impressive, especially considering Yodobayashi went straight from Mary to Kani and Kunino. But then the studio went radio silent for 3 years, and I'm not sure why. But it may have had something to do with The Boy and the Heron, seeing as many of Ponoc's staff went back to Ghibli to work on it. And my opinion on that movie is probably controversial. I think it has similar pacing problems to Mary and led to me not loving it at first. But then there's Tomorrow's Leaves, which is a short film that the studio made for the 2020 Olympics taking place in Japan in 2021. And it was my plan to review it, but man, I cannot find it anywhere. For some reason, the Olympics have copyright struck any and all of their footage, so I have no idea where to watch this. But according to Polygon, it's magical, and after Modest Heroes, I believe it. So I sadly can't watch it for myself. But that gives the final movie on our list some pretty high expectations. The Imaginary, which may make it sound like the studio has gone under, but no, this was released in Japan last summer, which was before The Boy and the Heron, and was localized by Netflix not even a month before I started working on this video. Directed by Momose, was it going to solve the pacing problems present in Mary and Heron? Or was it going to be apparent that Ponoc should stick to shorter anthology stories? Guys, this is one of the greatest animated movies I have ever seen. You could tell me Miyazaki worked on this movie and I wouldn't be surprised. This is better than The Boy and the Heron. S tier work. It's on Netflix. Pause this video, go watch the movie, and come back to me later. According to Letterboxd, I'm in the minority on this, so I expect that ZJ plays his wrong video soon, but I stand firm on this. I'm actually having trouble deciding if I like this more than Porco Rosso or not. This studio that split off from Ghibli made a movie that I might like more than any of their works. I don't know, I'll get back to you on that. I need to think about it more. Anyways, let's talk about this movie. that you watched. The Imaginary is about an imaginary friend, the third this year, named Rudger. No, not Roger, Rudger, with a U. We see most everything from his perspective, being this friend to a girl named Amanda. And, okay, for starters, this first act is borderline perfect. Within minutes, I was absolutely hooked for this whole movie, and my jaw was on the floor for the majority of it. We see Roger explain his situation and a typical day for him and Amanda, as well as Amanda's mom, Lizzie's, reaction to this. And there is so much to break down here, so let's start with the animation. Holy Hannah, it's not even comparable to Ghibli, it's so good. Not only is there just a whimsy to the way everything imaginary moves, but the way this movie is shaded is so... I'm not even sure how to describe it. Okay, you know those Art Academy games with those little art lessons that teach you how to paint baskets of fruit? Every frame looks like one of those fruit basket paintings with expertly handled shading everywhere. This isn't some amateur using a slightly darker shade to show depth. No, every character and object is shaded with what looks like 3 different brushes for each color needed. And half, nay, most of the things in this movie aren't even real. How does that even work? I could gush on and on about every frame and just how creative and well made it is. When did this movie start production? Was this why they hadn't made another anthology movie? If so, fine by me. I thought the animation in Modest Heroes was unique, but not only did they make a whole new style completely unique from what they made before, they spanned it over a 100-minute film. And thankfully, the movie doesn't feel as horribly paced as Mary. Not saying pacing is perfect, but good on them for improving. Actually, come to think of it, that might just be a Yonebayashi thing, but that's off topic. Another thing I love about this first act is the bending between the real and the imaginary world. The environments in the real world are dark and gray, while the imaginary ones are bright and fun, similar to Coraline. And I love Roger's interactions with the real world, or rather how the real world interacts with him. He pops in and out of scene depending on who's taking precedence. He doesn't appear in mirrors. There's a scene where Lizzie throws a sheet on Amanda with Roger nowhere in sight, and yet the sheet looks like he's under it, and there he is in the next shot. The first act loves playing around with Roger's partial presence, but my absolute favorite part of this first act is the fact that this girl's situation is not sugar-coated. To both Lizzie and the typical outside viewer, this is clear cognitive disassociation. Amanda and Roger promise to protect each other, never disappear, and never cry. Already in the first 10 minutes, you have no idea if this is a I see dead people situation or a young girl's grieving mind is crumbling in on her. Like when a mysterious man comes to their home and Amanda sees a strange girl with him, it's completely believable that she is just seeing the scenario with a creative yet scared imagination. That guy actually ends up being the villain, but the whole movie, I couldn't tell if he was actually some supernatural being who eats imaginaries, or a Kevin McAllister interpretation of this guy just doing his job. And that is such an amazing parallel that many can draw. Call up Cinema Therapy, they're going to have a field day with this one. That actually blends into one of my favorite things about the whole film. It takes into account just why the kids make up imaginaries and doesn't pull its punches. Wait a second, I'm getting ahead of myself. So after the mysterious man comes by, it leads to Amanda and Roger separating. This leads Roger to a library where tons of forgotten imaginaries come to serve as temporary imaginaries to kids around the world. Now, admittedly, this was when the movie started to lose me, as I was so much more invested in Roger and Amanda's relationship, and I thought the movie was just going to pull a Mary and completely shove that under the rug for a still cool, but less interesting plot in this world. But thankfully, this is just a slight detour and gets back to the original plot pretty easily. And that's not to say these scenes are bad, far from it. The imagination on display in this world for imaginaries is incredibly commendable. Plus, there's slower scenes where we learn about the kids who created these imaginaries. This is what I meant earlier. We hear about kids who just wanted a friend, didn't grow up in a loving home, or straight up spent their whole 6 years of life in a hospital bed. And this ultimately leads to the first scene of the movie that got me to cry. I won't dare spoil it for those who still haven't watched it like I ordered them to. Or the rest of the movie for that matter. I've set the scene way more than I needed to. Now, after all that, this movie isn't perfect. There are notably 3 things I feel fall short. For starters, the pacing is much better than Mary's, but not amazing. Like I said, the library stuff had me in the first half, and there's some stuff at the end that I feel like could have been condensed. Like, there's a plot point that's brought up and resolved in a matter of minutes in the last act, and I have to wonder why they even bothered at all. Again, it's not terrible and hardly hurts the biggest points of the movie, but it's noticeable. Secondly, the English voice cast. For the most part, it's fine. Haley Atwell does great as the mother, Jeremy Swift is the absolute best as the villain. The kids' voices aren't awful, though Roger's sounded a bit too girly at times. And there's an imaginary girl Roger meets named Emily. I know her actor is 19, and a rapper, but she still sounds way too old for her character design. Maybe that was just a me thing though, but what I swear was not a me thing is this hippo named Snowflake. Guess who they got to voice him? Yes, it's a boy, even in the Japanese dub. Did you guess Steve Carell? Well, you're wrong. He's in the other movie. Did you guess Roger Craig Smith doing a terrible Steve Carell impersonation? Of course you did. You already saw the movie, just like I ordered you to. And this isn't one of his more well-hidden roles. No, if you've seen him in anything other than Clarence, you will recognize his voice. And since it's established that you've seen the movie, that leads me to dislike number 3, which is more of a disappointment. The ending. It's not bad, it actually brought me to tears with it all. But you remember how I was saying how well this movie blends the magical yet mentally concerning elements so well you really couldn't tell if this was real or just a grieving girl's fantasies? Well, that ambiguity grows thinner and thinner until it's just gone by the end. Like I said, I like the ending we got. It was very emotional and well done, but I was really hoping for a Joker type ending where it would be more up in the air on whether this whole thing was a whole other world or just a delusional daydream. That was disappointing. But that doesn't mean you can't still draw parallels, and it doesn't make a movie any less amazing. After watching it, my plans of calling this video Studio Ponoc Great Value Ghibli has completely gone out the window. If you've only seen Mary and the Witch's Flower, you may think that. It's a shallow attempt at something from Studio Ghibli. But Modest Heroes and The Imaginary are both some of the greatest anime movies I've seen in some time. Did you notice how little I compare The Imaginary to Ghibli? It's because it's completely split off and unique, yet reaches the high standards of Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, Porco Rosso, and Nausicaa. All 3 of these movies are on Netflix in most regions, and I highly recommend you watch them all. Yes, even Mary, don't take my word for anything, form your own opinion. And I cannot recommend those latter 2 enough, and I hope the studio can continue to thrive. Here's to you, Ponoc. I await your next work with high expectations. Well, I guess I await Mimose's next work with high expectations.